Samuel Colt was born in Hartford, Connecticut. His mother's father, Major John Caldwell, had been an officer in the Continental Army. One of Samuel's earliest possessions was his maternal grandfather's flintlock pistol. His mother, Sarah, died from tuberculosis when Samuel was 6 years old, and his father remarried 2 years later. Samuel had 3 sisters, one of whom died during her childhood. His oldest sister, Margaret, died of tuberculosis at age 19, and the other, Sarah Ann, later committed suicide. At age 11, Colt was indentured to a farmer in Glastonbury, where he did chores and attended school. Here he was introduced to the Compendium of Knowledge, a scientific encyclopedia that he preferred to read rather than his Bible studies. He discovered that other inventors in the compendium had accomplished things that were once deemed impossible, and he wanted to do the same. Later, after hearing soldiers talk about the success of the double-barreled rifle and the impossibility of a gun that could shoot 5 or 6 times without reloading, Colt decided that he would create the impossible gun. In 1829, at the age of 15, Colt began working in his father's textile plant in Ware, Massachusetts, where he had access to tools, materials, and the factory workers' expertise. Samuel built a homemade galvanic cell and advertised as a 4th of July event in that year that he would blow up a raft on Ware Pond using underwater explosives. Although the raft was missed, the explosion was still impressive. Sent to boarding school, he amused his classmates with pyrotechnics. In 1830, a July 4th accident caused a fire that ended his schooling, and his father sent him off to learn the seaman's trade. On a voyage to Calcutta on board the brig Corvo, he noticed that regardless of which way the ship's wheel was spun, each spoke always came in direct line with a clutch that could be set to hold it. He later said that this gave him the idea for the revolver. On the Corvo, Colt made a wooden model of a pepperbox revolver out of scrap wood. It differed from the other pepperbox revolvers at the time in that it would allow the shooter to rotate the cylinder by the action of cocking the hammer, with an attached paw turning the cylinder, which is then locked firmly in alignment with one of the barrels by a bolt. A great improvement over the pepperbox designs, which required rotating the barrels by hand and hoping for proper indexing and alignment. When Colt returned to the United States of America in 1832, he went back to work with his father, who financed the production of 2 guns, a rifle and a pistol. The first completed pistol exploded when it was fired, but the rifle performed well. His father would not finance any further development, so Samuel needed to find a way to pay for the development of his ideas. He had learned about nitrous oxide from the factory chemist in his father's textile plant, and he took a portable lab on the road and earned a living performing laughing gas demonstrations across the US and Canada, billing himself as the celebrated Dr. Colt of New York, London, and Calcutta. Colt conceived of himself as a man of science and thought if he could enlighten people about the new ideas of nitrous oxide, he could in turn make people more receptive to his new ideas concerning a revolver. He started his lectures on street corners and soon worked his way up to lecture halls and museums. As ticket sales declined, Colt realized that serious museum lectures were not what people wanted to pay money to see. While visiting his brother John in Cincinnati, he partnered with sculptor Hiram Powers for his demonstrations with a theme based on the Divine Comedy. Powers made detailed wax sculptures and paintings based on demons, centaurs, and mummies from Dante. Colt constructed fireworks to complete the show, which was a success. Having some money saved and still wanting to be an inventor as opposed to a medicine man, Colt made arrangements to begin building guns using proper gunsmiths from Baltimore, Maryland. He applied for his U.S. patent for a revolving gun. He was granted the patent on February 25, 1836, later numbered 9430X. This instrument and patent number 1304, dated August 29, 1836, protected the basic principles of his revolving breech-loading, folding trigger firearm named the Colt Patterson. Colt formed a corporation of venture capitalists in April 1836 to bring his idea to market. Through the political connections of these venture capitalists, the Patents Arm Manufacturing of Paterson, New Jersey, was chartered by the New Jersey legislature on March 5, 1836. Colt was given a commission for each gun sold in exchange for his dam of patent rights, and stipulated the return of the rights if the company disbanded. Colt never claimed to have invented the revolver. His design was more a practical adaptation of Kohler's earlier revolving flintlock, incorporating a locking bolt to keep the cylinder in line with the barrel. The invention of a percussion cap made ignition more reliable, faster, and safer than the older flintlock design. Colt's great contribution was to the use of interchangeable parts. Knowing that some gun parts were made by machine, he had envisioned that all the parts on every Colt gun to be interchangeable and made by machine, later to be assembled by hand. His goal was the assembly line. Colt's U.S. revolver patent gave him a monopoly on revolving manufacture until 1857. His was the first practical revolver and the first practical repeating firearm thanks to progress made in percussion technology. Although by the end of 1837 the arms company had made over 1,000 weapons, there were no sales. Following the Panic of 1837, the company's underwriters were reluctant to fund the new machinery that Colt needed to make interchangeable parts, so he went on the road to raise money. Demonstrating his gun to people in general stores did not generate the sales volume he needed. So with another loan from his cousin, he went to Washington, D.C. and demonstrated it to President Andrew Jackson. Jackson approved of the gun and wrote Colt a note saying so. Presidential approval in hand, Colt pushed a bill through Congress endorsing a demonstration for the military, but failed to obtain a military purchase of the weapon. A promising order from the state of South Carolina for 50 to 75 pistols was canceled when the company did not produce them quickly enough. After some financial difficulties, the company was briefly saved by the war against the Seminoles in Florida. Captain Samuel Walker of the Texas Rangers had acquired some of the first Colt revolvers produced during the Seminole War, and saw firsthand their effective use as his 15-man unit defended a larger force of 70 Comanche in Texas. The soldiers in Florida praised the new weapon, but the unusual hammerless design, 60 years ahead of its time, led to difficulty in training men who used to expose hammered guns. In late 1843, after the loss of payment for the Florida pistols, the Paterson, New Jersey plant closed and a public auction was held in New York City to sell the company's most liquid assets. Colt did not refrain long from manufacturing and turned to selling underwater electrical detonations and waterproof cables of his own invention. Soon after the failure of the patent arms manufacturing company, he teamed up with Samuel Morse to lobby the U.S. government for funds. Colt's waterproof cables, made from tar-coated copper, proved valuable when Morse ran telegraph lines under lakes, rivers, bays, and in his attempt to lay a telegraph line under the Atlantic Ocean. Colt turned his attention to perfecting tinfoil cartridges he had originally designed for use in the revolvers. In 1841, he made samples of these cartridges for the Army. The reception was lukewarm, and the Army purchased a few thousand rounds for further testing. In 1843, the Army returned to Colt with an order of 200,000 of the tinfoil cartridges packed 10 to a box for use in muskets. Captain Samuel Walker wanted to order Colt revolvers for use by the Texas Rangers in the Mexican-American War and traveled to New York City in search of Colt. He met Colt in a gunsmith shop on January 4, 1847 and placed an order for 1,000 revolvers. Walker asked for a few changes. The large order allowed Colt to establish a new firearm business. Colt used his prototype and Walker's improvements as the basis for a new design, known as the Colt Walker. The company then received an order for 1,000 more. Colt took a share of the profits at $10 per pistol for both orders. With the money he made from the sales of the Walkers and a loan from his cousin, Colt bought the machinery and tooling from Blake to build his own factory, Colt Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company, factory at Hartford, Connecticut. The first revolving breech pistols were made at the factory were called Whitneyville Hartford Dragoons and became so popular that the word Colt was often used as a generic term for the revolver. Beginning in 1848, more contracts followed for what is today known as the Colt Dragoon revolvers. Besides being used in the war with Mexico, Colt revolvers were employed as a sidearm by both civilians and soldiers. Colt revolvers were a key tool in Western expansion. In 1848, Colt introduced smaller versions of his pistols known as baby dragoons that were made for civilian use. In 1850, General Sam Houston and General Thomas Jefferson Rusk lobbied Secretary of War William Marcy and President James K. Polk to adopt Colt's revolvers for the U.S. military. Rusk testified, "Colt's repeating arms are the most efficient weapons in the world and the only weapon which has enabled the frontiersman to defeat the mounted Indian in his own particular mode of warfare." Colt followed his design with the Colt 1851 Navy revolver, which was larger than the baby dragoon, but not quite as large as the full-size version. The gun became the standard sidearm for U.S. military officers and proved popular among civilian buyers. Ever the opportunist, when the war with Mexico was over, Colt sent agents south of the border to procure sales from the Mexican government. During this period, Colt received an extension on his patent since he did not collect on it in the early years. In 1854, Colt fought for his patent extension with the U.S. Congress, who launched a special committee to investigate charges that Colt had bribed government officials in securing this extension. By August, he was exonerated, and the story became national news when Scientific American reported that the fault was not with Colt, but with Washington politicians. With a virtual monopoly, Colt sold his pistols in Europe, where demand was high due to tense international relations. By telling each other that the others were buying Colt pistols, Colt was able to get large orders from many countries who feared falling behind in the arms race. Colt purchased a large tract of land beside the Connecticut River, where he built his first factory in 1848, a large factory called the Colt Armory in 1855, a manor that he called Armsmere in 1856, and employee tenement housing. He established a 10-hour day for employees, installed washing stations in every factory, mandated a 1-hour lunch break, and built the Charter Oak Hall, where employees could enjoy games, newspapers, and discussion rooms. Colt ran his plant with a military-like discipline. He would fire workers for tardiness, subpar work, or even suggesting improvements to his designs. Colt's factory was the first to make use of the concept known as the assembly line. The idea was not new, but was never successful in industry at the time because of the lack of interchangeable parts. Colt's revolvers were made by machine, but he insisted on the final hand finishing and polishing of the revolvers to impart a handmade feel. Colt turned to artisan gun makers from Bavaria and developed a commercial use for Waterman Orsby grammagraph to produce roll die engraving on steel, particularly on the cylinders. In an attempt to attract skilled European immigrant workers to his plant, Colt built a village near the factory, away from the tenements, which he named Coltsville, and modeled the homes after a village in Potsdam. In an effort to stem the flooding from the river, he planted German osiers, a type of willow tree, in a 2-mile-long dike. He subsequently built a factory to manufacture wicker furniture made from these trees. On June 5, 1856, Colt married Elizabeth Jarvis, who lived downriver from Hartford. The wedding was lavish and featured a ceremony on a steamship overlooking the factory, as well as fireworks and rifle salutes. The couple had 4 children, 2 daughters and a son who died in infancy, and a son born in 1858, Caldwell Hart Colt. Soon after establishing his Hartford factory, Colt set out to establish a factory in Europe and chose London. He organized a large display of his firearms at the Great Exhibition in 1851 at Hyde Park, London. Colt established his London operation near Vauxhall Bridge on the Thames River and began production on January 1, 1853. Colt's London factory remained in operation for only 4 years. Colt scarcely sold 23,000 revolvers to the British Army and Navy. In 1856, he closed the London plant. As the American Civil War approached, Colt supplied both the North and South with firearms. In 1859, Colt considered building an armory in the South, and as late as 1861 had sold 2,000 revolvers to Confederate agent John Forsyth. Although trade with the South had not been restricted at the time, newspapers such as the New York Daily Tribune, the New York Times, and the Hartford Daily Courant labeled him a Southern sympathizer and a traitor to the Union. In response to these charges, Colt was commissioned as a colonel by the state of Connecticut on May 16, 1861, in the 1st Regiment Colt's Revolving Rifles of Connecticut. However, the unit never took the field, and Colt was discharged on June 20, 1861. Samuel Colt died of gout in Hartford on January 10, 1862, and was buried in Cedar Hill Cemetery. In 1867, his widow Elizabeth had an Episcopal church designed by Edward Tuckerman Potter built as a memorial to Samuel Colt and the 3 children they lost. The church's architecture contains guns and gunsmithing tools sculpted in marble to commemorate Colt's life as an arms maker. In 1896, a parish house was built on the site as a memorial to their son, Caldwell, who died in 1894. In 1975, the Church of the Good Shepherd and Parish House was listed in the National Register of Historic Places. In 2006, Samuel Colt was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame.